Gathering before a magnificent palace, an unseen speaker formally thanks the assembled crowd. Sitting upon his grand throne, the king asks if the royal candidates are prepared as he announces the trial to determine the 17th monarch of the Grandal Kingdom. The late king's second prince, Liam, stands attentively to hear his fate. Renaud, the late king's confident first prince, awaits the royal decree. A poised young woman with an elegant braided ponytail and a floral choker observes the proceeding in silence. Concluding his announcement, the king demands great effort from all the candidates starting tomorrow. While Liam clutches his chest nervously, the poised young woman and a smirking Renaud stand their ground. The king declares that whoever finds the reincarnated Maiden of Light and awakens her power will be chosen as the next ruler. Shock ripples through the siblings as Liam calls the condition absurd while Renaud mutters the legendary title in disbelief. Reflecting on the legendary saint known as the Maiden of Light, the candidates realize the king has truly outdone himself this time. Legend tells of a confined saint who used her power of light to resurrect a betrayed prince, ultimately falling in love with him. Before passing away, the saint spoke to the newly crowned king who renamed their realm the Grandal Kingdom after years of joint service. The saint promised to always watch over the kingdom, vowing to return no matter how many times she might be reborn. Despite the church raising maiden candidates for the coronation tradition, the siblings dismissed the Maiden of Light as a mere legend. Snapping her fan shut decisively, the young woman flatly declares that awakening the power of light is impossible. She reflects that every monarch since the first king has fruitlessly searched for the maiden's reincarnation. Acknowledging the exhaustion of the heavily taxed people, she internally resolves to ease their burden if she becomes ruler. Holding her elegant fan thoughtfully to her lips, she firmly states that she will take on the challenge. She rationalizes the bizarre trial by concluding that His Majesty must have his hidden reasons. Flashing a charming but calculated smile, Renaud turns to young Liam and asks for his agreement. Stepping protectively in front of Liam, the young woman boldly proclaims that she will support her brother. A tense silence falls as she sharply questions what Renaud has actually learned as royalty. Renaud narrows his eyes and coldly utters her name, Violetta, revealing the simmering sibling rivalry. Violetta cynically summarizes his cruel political philosophy that commoners exist merely to serve the nobility and must be kept on the brink of survival. Flashing a fierce, mocking smile over her fan, Violetta challenges him with a daring scoff. She glares at Renaud with absolute disdain, fiercely refusing to ever hand the crown over to someone like him. Turning her back on him dramatically, she predicts that the entire kingdom would fall to ruin if he sat upon the throne. Her intense gaze hardens as a sudden, overwhelming sensation strikes her mind. As Renaud defensively questions her apocalyptic prediction, Violetta's internal world begins to fracture. A violent mental snap echoes through her consciousness alongside the chilling thought of death. Stumbling backward as if struck by an unseen force, Violetta gasps in total confusion. Clutching her head, she suddenly realizes that this extravagant palace feels impossibly familiar. A jarring vision of a modern Japanese businesswoman flashes before her eyes, echoing a desire to do better work. Trembling in agony, she grips her head as a torrent of alien memories violently invades her mind. She astonishingly realizes that she is the reincarnation of Hinomari, a woman who died at age 24 in a previous life. Memories of her past life as a dedicated management consultant desperate to help people flood her consciousness. The fragmented pieces finally align as she accepts the undeniable truth that she used to be a Japanese woman. Staring into the void of her overlapping lives, she mutters in quiet agreement with her own sudden epiphany. The stark realization hits her that if she herself takes the throne with her current reputation, it will only end in utter disaster. Snapping back to the present, Violetta looks utterly bewildered by the overwhelming download of her past life. Forcing herself to snap out of the daze, she remembers dying with the intense desire to live freely in her next life. Acting purely on impulsive modern instincts, she violently grabs a startled Renaud by the collar and shakes him. The scene shifts to her private quarters where a maid politely delivers breakfast and checks on Lady Violetta's health. The poor maid freezes in sheer terror and drops the breakfast tray upon seeing the usually terrifying princess. Standing meekly in her nightgown, Violetta politely thanks the maid for the food and apologizes for causing any worry yesterday. As the shattered teacup spills across the floor, Violetta anxiously steps forward to check on the paralyzed servant. Panicking over her mistake, the maid shrieks for forgiveness and sprints away to grab cleaning supplies. Ignoring the mess, A deeply concerned Violetta desperately asks if the fleeing maid burned her hand. Left standing alone in a daze, she reconciles her past life with her current identity as Violetta de Grandal, the first princess. Staring at the spilled tea, Violetta laments that her past atrocious behavior has made her absolutely terrifying to her own staff. Reflecting on her terrible personality, Violetta grimaces at her history of gossip, harassment, and utter lack of studying. A terrifying realization strikes her that if Renaud claims the throne, the kingdom's boiling resentment could lead straight to her execution. Despite her past arrogance, she begrudgingly admits that anyone can plainly see Renaud is far more fit to wear the crown. Flopping back onto her luxurious bed, Violetta stares blankly at the ceiling as the heavy weight of her situation sinks in. Gazing intensely into an ornate mirror, she recognizes the eerie, stern familiarity of her past life as Hinomari. Muttering the lore of the Maiden of Light and the royal trial, she desperately pieces together the fragments of this bizarre reality. A sudden, shocking revelation strikes her mind, forcing her to gasp as an impossible truth finally takes shape. Memories of a specific story flood her mind, detailing how the church trains Maiden of Light candidates to crown the Grandal Kingdom's next ruler. Complete panic sets in as the horrifying realization dawns that she is trapped inside a casual romance game a friend once lent her. She recalls the game's core plot where banished princes and a radiant heroine team up to rightfully reclaim the stolen throne. The romantic storyline centered around the heroine falling deeply in love with a valiant knight hidden in disguise. Staring wide-eyed at her delicate, trembling hands, Violetta fully absorbs the terrifying gravity of her new fictional existence. A wicked, menacing figure flashes in her mind, representing the ultimate enemy who constantly tormented the game's beloved heroine. Clutching her face in sheer horror, Violetta realizes she is actually the villainous princess destined for absolute ruin at the game's climax. A morbid showroom of tragic endings flashes before her eyes, ranging from brutal assassinations to rotting away in a dark dungeon. She remembers the original plot where a resentful Violetta massacres the king and seizes the throne, ultimately driving the oppressed people to revolt. Sweating nervously, she accepts that continuing down the path of the game's villainess will guarantee her a catastrophic and bloody doom. Determined to change her grim fate, Violetta marches into the massive, towering royal library to seek out desperately needed answers. Deeply frustrated by her previously casual playthrough, she desperately wishes she could remember the crucial revolution scenes and character faces. Stepping up to the grand bookshelves, she vows to dig up any hidden clue that might save her from a gruesome execution. Acknowledging her past refusal to study, she resolves to immerse herself in the kingdom's history to trigger dormant game memories. Inhaling deeply, Violetta closes her eyes and expresses her absolute devotion to the dry, comforting scent of ancient paper. Thrilled by the endless shelves, she joyfully celebrates the profound knowledge and rich emotions that books graciously offer. Sneaking a peek around a tall bookshelf, she suddenly spots Prince Renaud carefully pulling a volume from the dusty stacks. The elegant prince freezes and calls out her name, his voice laced with unmistakable surprise. Renaud turns to face her, his sharp expression clouded by cautious shock and confusion. Forcing herself to stay calm and act mature, Violetta elegantly curtsies and bids Renaud a good day. She mentally curses herself for breathing heavily over the ancient books, painfully aware of how utterly bizarre she must look. Renaud merely stares back at her with wide, unblinking eyes full of absolute bewilderment. Still visibly stunned by her unusually polite greeting, he stiffly warns her to be careful with the expensive volumes. A sudden, defensive outburst from Violetta catches him completely off guard, causing a stack of heavy books to slip from his grasp. Crossing her arms, she fiercely points out that he has never been the type to lift anything heavier than a delicate fan. Bending down to the floor, Renaud quietly dismisses her help and insists on gathering the dropped texts himself. Pausing his task, he shoots her a razor-sharp glare and coldly asks if he is wrong to doubt her sudden change in behavior. Violetta flinches as she realizes he actively suspects her of using this library commotion to orchestrate a shady political scheme. Sighing heavily, she silently chides her past self for foolishly hating someone so undeniably noble and dedicated to the kingdom. She confirms his identity as Renaud, recalling that the game featured both him and his sweet brother Liam as the primary romance targets. With a humble and serious expression, Renaud smoothly dismisses her gratitude by claiming he only did what any decent person would do. Violetta earnestly thanks the cautious prince for safely carrying her to her chambers after her sudden and violent collapse yesterday. Renaud locks eyes with her, his soft, searching gaze revealing his profound surprise at her sudden display of genuine appreciation. A crushing wave of guilt washes over Violetta as she finally recognizes the true depths of her past thoughtlessness. She silently acknowledges that offering a sincere apology is something her stubborn, wicked past self could never have achieved. Deep regret fills her heart for constantly picking fights with a cousin who is so clearly capable, patient, and kind. Gripping the fabric of her dress tightly, she boldly confesses to Renaud that she used to be a selfish and terrible person. Standing tall with his recovered books, Renaud listens in stunned silence as she formally apologizes for her past hostility. Violetta earnestly pleads for a fresh start, expressing a deep, newfound desire to become a kind and generous person just like him. Renaud slowly averts his eyes, his stoic, handsome profile completely masking the complex emotions churning beneath the surface. She internally laments the harsh reality of spending yesterday entirely alone, realizing she was fundamentally unfit to be a royal princess. Turning his back on her abruptly, Renaud cuts the conversation short by stiffly claiming he has no time to spare today. Watching him walk away, an optimistic Violetta notes that it is at least a step forward for royal heirs to attempt friendly terms. Gasping in profound shock, the elegant Violetta reels from an invisible blow that entirely shatters her calm composure. Confronting her complete and utter rejection, she desperately questions how she could ever manage to earn back his deeply shattered trust. Recognizing the bitter irony, she admits that a formerly hateful woman suddenly acting nice right after the royal trial announcement would naturally make anyone suspicious. Stepping gracefully into her turbulent life, the youngest professor approaches with a deceptive smile while politely offering his formal condolences. Struck by a sudden revelation, her wide eyes signal the birth of a daring new strategy as she abruptly demands a momentary pause. Deducing the hidden truth behind his perpetual smile, she strongly suspects he secretly despises her for chronically skipping his mandatory lessons. Formulating a master plan to hit two birds with one stone, she resolves to learn efficiently from the teacher while proving her serious commitment to radical change. Springing into decisive action, she boldly asks Professor Sven to personally tutor her about the intricate workings of the entire kingdom. Utterly bewildered by her sudden academic interest, he questions why the precise girl who never attended a single class suddenly desires to rigorously study. Maintaining his perfectly composed demeanor, the professor firmly references a serious prior conversation he recently held with Renaud. Casting her gaze downward in solemn agreement, she openly acknowledges that her dramatic change of heart remains incredibly difficult to logically believe. Wrestling with agonizing internal uncertainty, she wonders desperately if Sven will ever truly believe in her profound character transformation. Bowing her head in deep remorse, she openly regrets her previous irresponsibility and selfishly pleads for his continuous expert guidance. Bubbling with triumphant joy over clearing the first major obstacle, she mentally celebrates discovering the surprisingly kind nature hiding beneath Sven's scary facade. A thunderous crash aggressively echoes through the quiet library as heavy academic tomes forcefully strike the solid wooden desk surfaces. Surprising her with enthusiastic compliance, Sven promises to gather several vital books, leaving Violetta gasping with overwhelming genuine gratitude. Staring in absolute horror at the incoming material, she fearfully questions the massive pile he describes as merely containing her bare minimum lacking knowledge. Grunting with heavy physical exertion, the deceptively cheerful professor forcefully slams down a colossal, towering mountain of thick academic volumes. Flashing a brilliantly sadistic smile, he cheerfully commands her to start immediately by reading absolutely every single dense page thoroughly by herself. Groaning under the oppressive weight of his petty revenge, she realizes trust recovery demands suffering through geography, politics, and commoner culture. Trembling visibly before the monumental academic task, she offers a meekly terrified verbal submission to her imposing tutor's demanding curriculum. Reflecting proudly on her grueling efforts, she confidently claims to finally understand the country's intricate socio-political landscape significantly better. Sacrificing sleep for an entire grueling week, she attacks the massive pile of literature with the manic desperation of a frantic college exam crammer. Clutching her head in immense frustration, she agonizingly realizes that despite her intense marathon studying, she still cannot remember the crucial game details. Realizing the palace library lacks sufficient information, she deduces that exploring the lower town herself might trigger memories of the game's central locations. Acknowledging the frustratingly slow pace of nobles-dominated politics, she silently processes the vast societal inequalities plaguing the kingdom's development. Startling her with a sudden early morning appearance, the ever-smiling professor warmly commends her remarkably consistent and impressive diligence. Pondering the severe spatial restrictions of her noble high status, she seriously questions whether royalty can truly wander the public streets so freely. Connecting the sudden realization that she hasn't seen Renaud, she recalls how he habitually dodges her every single morning despite frequenting the Grand Library. Scolding him defensively for sneaking up so quietly, she closely listens as Sven praises everyone's intensified studying following the commencement of the royal trial. Breaking the casual flowing conversation, she deliberately points out Renaud's highly suspicious and notable absence from the palace grounds today. Experiencing a brilliant flash of critical meta-knowledge, she excitedly remembers a classic romantic trope where incognito princes inevitably fall completely in love. Validating her wildest paranoid suspicions, Sven casually reveals that Renaud disguised himself this morning to secretly inspect the bustling castle town. Mentally outlining the disastrous plot, she remembers how Renaud injures himself exploring the lower town before repeatedly secretly visiting the heroine who treats him. Sensing her rapidly rising panic, Sven slyly asks if her sudden immense distress means she harbors a sudden interest in conducting her own town inspection. Gripped by terrifying, unyielding urgency, she realizes the main story has officially begun and dreads the devastating consequences if the fateful meeting has already occurred. Piercing her soul with an intensely sharp gaze, the quiet professor seemingly analyzes her desperate internal panic in complete, heavily unyielding silence. Sweating profusely under his intense probing scrutiny, she desperately tries to verbally dismiss the impending romantic catastrophe unfolding in the distant town. Abandoning all expected noble pretense, she forcefully begs Sven to immediately grant her explicit permission to venture out into the bustling city as well. Staring incredulously at the majestic sprawling estate architecture, she practically screams in sheer disbelief at how incredibly quickly he approved her wildly inappropriate request. Swiftly facilitating her frantic covert mission, Sven instructs her to wait while he personally asks Mother to arrange a simple towngirl outfit for the urban outing. Hiding his true dark manipulative intentions, he logically notes that nobody would ever normally approve a commoner mocking princess wandering the dangerous streets so easily. Navigating the overwhelmingly crowded cobblestone streets, she nervously admits that gaining this unprecedented movement freedom was honestly terrifyingly easy. Weaving cautiously through the dense urban populace, she paranoidly resolves to keep her back fully covered while fearing a potential unseen threat. Glaring suspiciously into the hazy distance, she boldly questions whether the suspiciously helpful professor actually plans to completely get rid of her by abandoning her alone. Venturing much deeper into the class-divided capital, she bravely approaches the notoriously poor residential district directly housing the heroine's crucial pharmacy. Clutching the heavy royal crest necklace tightly, she resents him merely handing her identification without even assigning a single highly protective guard. Stepping bravely past crumbling ancient brickwork and discarded splintered timber, she fully infiltrates the grim, shadow-drenched alleyways of the impoverished lower sector. Confronting the incredibly harsh reality of urban extreme poverty, she closely observes ragged vulnerable commoners huddling miserably in the dimly lit, terribly claustrophobic streets. Dangerously dilapidated wooden architecture hanging above, she absorbs the deeply suffocating atmosphere completely defining the desperately impoverished residential slum. Observing the miserable conditions of the impoverished lower town, heavily burdened men bitterly discuss the awful economic gap and severe lack of jobs. A scruffy resident quickly snaps at his companion, harshly warning him not to talk so smart in such a dangerous and volatile place. Darkly envisioning a violent societal uprising, they ruthlessly predict the wealthy will inevitably face the guillotine when the breaking point is reached. Stuttering nervously, Anneli desperately tries to escape a looming thug by politely explaining she only came to deliver medicine. Startled by the sudden aggressive commotion, Violetta pauses her covert urban inspection to investigate the escalating street dispute. Peeking cautiously around the crumbling brick corner, she intently observes the grim situation unfolding in the shadowed alleyway. Analyzing the incredibly cliched scenario, she immediately identifies the situation as a classic textbook creep move while scanning for potential helpers. Struck completely breathless by the heroine's radiant beauty, Violetta can only mentally gasp at how unbelievably gorgeous the girl is. Gripping her forcefully, the confident thug aggressively dismisses her obvious panic while insisting everything is completely fine. Worrying for the cute girl, She nervously waits for a heroic savior to appear since the game's setup strictly demands it. Yanking the terrified girl's arm aggressively, the thug forcefully imposes his physical will upon the deeply startled heroine. Watching the alarming situation rapidly deteriorate, Violetta grows increasingly anxious as the thug prepares to drag Annalai away. Ignoring her desperate pleas to return home, the menacing man aggressively forces her toward a hidden corner against her will. Gripping the front of her simple dress tightly, Violetta wrestles with her intense hesitation and the terrifying reality of stepping into the fray. Steeling her trembling resolve, she tightens her fists and courageously prepares to abandon her safe hiding spot to intervene. Trembling under the terrifying shadow of her massive attacker, the helpless heroine fully realizes the horrific danger of her situation. Unable to merely watch an innocent suffer, Violetta bravely steps into the alleyway while sweating profusely from immense internal fear. Turning with tear-filled eyes, Annalai looks completely stunned by the unexpected sudden appearance of the disguised noble girl. Boldly confronting the thug, Violetta loudly demands he stop fooling around, knowing she would completely lose her dignity as a woman if she abandoned her. Staring in utter disbelief at her beautiful savior, Annalai gasps in shock at the miraculous and entirely unexpected intervention. Projecting a fierce authoritative tone, Violetta harshly scolds the girl for failing to return immediately after delivering the required medicine. Leaning in incredibly close, she urgently whispers for the bewildered heroine to just silently go along with her sudden improvisation. Wrapping her arm protectively around the girl's shoulders, she confidently lies to the thug, claiming to be the irresponsible girl's older sister. Relieved her trembling voice didn't betray her massive fear, she attempts to swiftly drag her away before their fragile deception shatters. Freezing in pure terror, the heroine's eyes widen massively as the persistent thug suddenly shouts her actual name into the alley. Desperately attempting to brush off the fatal error, Violetta quickly claims they have urgent business and tries to rush away without looking back. Catching the fatal flaw in their fragile story, the smirking thug casually reminds Annalai that she explicitly claimed to be completely alone in the world. Flashing a deeply sadistic grin, the massive man violently blocks their path while excitedly declaring his foul intention to have fun with the sister too. Glaring sharply at the terrified heroine, Violetta realizes with absolute dread that she was entirely tricked by the girl's clumsy honesty. Frustrated by the total absence of any rescuing hero, she mentally scolds the weeping Annalai for picking the absolute worst time to be truthful. Staring down the grim escape route, she bitterly regrets venturing into the dangerous slums without a single guard or self-defense weapon. Screaming at the top of her lungs, she forcefully drags the heroine into a frantic sprint while yelling at her to just lie next time. Sprinting with explosive desperation, Violetta forcefully pulls the terrified Annalai through the narrow, twisting cobblestone alleyways. Pushing her aristocratic body past its absolute physical limits, she gasps heavily for air while blindly fleeing the relentless pursuers. Panting with total exhaustion, she stumbles forward, realizing their violent pursuers are terrifyingly fast and quickly closing the distance. Confronting her own grim mortality, she finds it intensely depressing that her death here would be entirely ignored by her uncaring royal family. Formulating a desperate sacrificial plan, she sharply commands Annalai to turn left at the approaching corner and run away alone. Apologizing sincerely for accidentally dragging her deeper into this terrifying mess, Violetta prepares to forcibly separate from the heroine. Flashing a brilliant, profoundly reassuring smile, she thanks the girl for her help and confidently claims she will be entirely fine on her own. Whirling around with a fierce, unyielding glare, she bravely prepares to physically block the narrow alleyway with her own body. Shoving the heroine violently toward safety, she firmly plants her feet and faces the charging attackers completely alone to buy precious time. A heavy, calloused hand violently snatches her delicate dress, abruptly terminating her desperate final sprint for freedom. Towering over her with murderous intent, the furious thug aggressively declares she has really done it now by defying him. Glaring fiercely into the eyes of her massive attacker, she boldly refuses to display even a single ounce of expected noble fear. Abandoning all hope of a heroic rescue, she resolves to stop sulking and fiercely fight back to save her own life. Reaching blindly toward the ruined architecture, her trembling fingers wrap tightly around a heavy, jagged stone block for defense. Acknowledging the harsh reality of this Otome world, she recognizes that despite the romantic game setting, the terror these cute girls face is completely real. Shattering the tense standoff, A sudden male voice boldly announces he came searching because he was deeply worried about Lady Annalai. Screaming with absolute explosive fury, the heroic savior violently intervenes, aggressively demanding to know what the thug thinks he is doing. Stepping into the light with a furious glare, the disguised Prince Renaud sharply condemns the thug for cowardly raising his hand against a woman. Gazing forward, a striking man with light hair contemplates the sudden turn of events with a serious expression. He remarks with mild astonishment at the unfolding spectacle playing out before him. Observing the struggle, the disguised princess remarks that something actually did happen that feels like a cliché otome game. Holding the writhing boy down, she thinks about her 16 years of life in this kingdom. Reassuring the girl that she is fine, she notes it has been a week since she remembered her past life. Questioning the stranger's identity, she dreads her future as the doomed villain princess racing toward destruction. Claiming to be the girl's older sister to show they were both starting to change, she faces immediate backlash as they shout she is a liar. While the boy apologizes for a lapse in judgment, the knight questions if it is alright to just let him go like that. Refusing to let him off, the knight argues that a remorseful guy only gets bolder, noting this lapse in judgment is his third time. Brushing off the concern, Annalai insists it is fine because even Eric seemed remorseful this time. Standing tall in blue fabric with gold trim, he reveals himself as a knight of the church who serves the faith of the Maiden of Light. Adjusting the large bow on her cape, the rescued girl beams with gentle gratitude. Introducing herself, Annalai says thank you so much for saving her earlier. Pondering why a knight of the church is here, Viola recalls he said something about coming to fetch that girl. Expressing pleasant surprise, Annalai asks if it is all right to ask her savior's name. Caught off guard by the question, she hesitates and begins to say she is Vio. Saying you're welcome, he warns her to be careful since it didn't look like the first time something like that happened, though Annalai insists he understood after she explained. Realizing that was close, she thinks she almost gave her real name, which would have ruined the whole disguise. Pivoting smoothly, she claims the name Viola, prompting Annalai to enthusiastically address her as Lady Viola. Hoping the big difference from the royal portraits keeps her hidden since no one recognized her in town, she worries about her hair color, eyes, and the name Viola. Hearing Lars speak, she internally panics as he points out she is just like that wicked, ruthless princess. The actual princess listens as Lars dismisses the idea, stating there's no way she'd ever be here because that princess sees commoners as nothing more than insects. Wondering if knights are always this sharp, she fears looking suspicious if she denies it too hard and asks herself if she is doomed already. Sensing the tension, Annalai points out that Lady Viola seems uncomfortable being asked her opinion on that. Scolding Lars firmly, Annalai demands that he shouldn't speak of others like that. Noting that Lars really does seem to despise Violetta, she accepts his apology as he says he didn't mean to upset them with talk of that princess. Bowing his head slightly, Lars offers a sincere apology. Deciding she should go before she says something that gives her away, Viola abruptly attempts to excuse herself. Startled by her sudden departure, Annalai stammers and calls out for Lady Viola to wait. Stepping forward to intercept her, Lars focuses his attention entirely on the fleeing girl. Asking if she twisted her ankle, Annalai suggests going to a nearby clinic to have it looked at right away, while Lars adds that she shouldn't take sprains lightly. Catching the stumbling girl, Annalai asks if she is alright, but Viola insists she is fine and just tripped on a step. Waving her hands defensively, Viola begs them not to trouble themselves, claiming it's really not that bad. Supporting her weight firmly against his armored chest, Lars asks if she can stand. Staring closely at her face, Lars falls into a thoughtful silence. Trapped in his intense gaze, Viola panics internally as an awkward silence stretches between them. Flustered by the proximity, she stammers weakly. Realizing that deep down he's an honest and good person, she notes he suspected her at first. Wondering if he is sharp or just clueless, she accepts his apology as he calls it terribly rude to touch a lady without permission, noting his personality doesn't exactly scream knight. Arriving at their destination, the group stands before a rustic building with a sturdy wooden roof. Taking in the interior, Viola lets out a breathless sigh of amazement. Glass jars packed with various dried leaves, herbs, and mushrooms line the apothecary shelves next to thick books. Baffled by the situation, she wonders what is happening right now and why she is being taken care of by a handsome man and a cute girl. Guiding her to a chair, Lars asks her to please have a seat and excuses himself while he takes a look. As Lars diagnoses a light sprain, Viola wonders whose clinic this is and what Annalie's connection to that night is, unable to refuse their kindness. Pleading internally for them to say something instead of sitting in silence, she listens as Annalai voices her understanding. Shocked when Annalai offers to mix up some medicine and asks her to wait a moment, Viola questions if the girl is the one treating her. Turning her head slightly, Annalai flashes a confident and reassuring expression. Beaming brightly, Annalai explains she is something like a pharmacist and proudly declares this is her clinic. Connecting the dots about a clinic run by a pharmacist with a church knight for protection, Viola tells herself to wait a second as realization dawns. Greeting her young visitor with a warm smile, the woman welcomes Lise into the room. Excitedly announcing her arrival, Lise greets Lady Annalai and explains she came to pick up her mother's medicine. Looking up at Annalai with admiration, Lise notes she is the only maiden of light candidate who visits such humble places. Overwhelmed by her generosity, Lise calls it incredible that Annalai gives them medicine completely for free. Flustered by the high praise, Annalai waves off the compliment and humbly insists she is not that great a person. Arguing against her modesty, Lise points out that the church wouldn't assign such a skilled knight to protect just anyone. Lowering her gaze softly, Annalai confesses she is just a dropout who left the church despite being chosen as a candidate. Listening closely from the doorway, Viola realizes the shocking rumors about the runaway candidate are entirely true. Connecting the dots, she marvels at a candidate leaving the church to open a free clinic alongside a romanceable knight. Staring at the beautiful girl holding a medicinal herb, Viola instantly recognizes Annalai as the heroine destined to defeat her. Sighing heavily at her desk, Viola reflects on her daily information gathering and groans over actually meeting the game's heroine. Reviewing her character checklist, she confirms the heroine isn't a maiden of light but instead opened a pharmacy in town. Recalling the town's gossip, she notes the heroine's widespread reputation as the selfless saint who provides free medicine. Setting her pen down with absolute certainty, she concludes there is no doubt Annalai is the story's true heroine. Remembering Lars's shock at Annalie's precise herbal formulas, she notes the heroine keeps. Pondering the heroine's current status, she wonders what happens if Annalai isn't romancing a main character yet. Resting her chin on her hands with a gentle smile, Viola genuinely wishes for the kind and admirable heroine to be happy. Thinking back to her trips into town, she remembers that the early part of the game is shared among all story routes. Slumping back in her chair with a stressed groan, she dreads seeing the kingdom collapse in any of the potential routes. Recalling the game's turning point, she notes the Grand Ball dictates whether the kingdom faces violent riots or a terrifying plague. Steeling her resolve with a serious glare, she refuses to abandon this country knowing the dark future that awaits it. Questioning her next move, she wonders if she should simply renounce her claim to the throne and run away. Deciding to push forward, she resolves to just keep gathering information in town for the time being. Exhausted by the mental strain, she collapses onto her desk in front of a large ornate mirror. Groaning in frustration, she reflects on repeating this tiring investigative routine over and over these past few days. Lamenting the severe energy drain, she realizes how exhausting it is to talk to strangers all day compared to her past life. Gazing upward with a tired breath, she wishes she had remembered her original motivation much sooner. Clutching a paper bag as she navigates the busy streets, Viola tries to figure out the root of her exhaustion. Trailing off in thought, she questions why she ever became a consultant in the first place. Hearing a shopkeeper's welcome, she freezes in panic upon spotting a creepy man she desperately wants to avoid. Dreading another encounter, she curses her luck for running into that unpredictable creep again. Peeking cautiously through the shop window, she gets a terrible feeling about whatever shady business is happening inside. Hiding her face behind her paper bag, she squints through the glass to spy on the suspicious transaction. Watching silently from the shadows, she keeps her eyes locked on the figures inside. Noticing the hanging herbs and glass jars, she realizes with utter confusion that the shop is actually a pharmacy. Piecing the scene together, she wonders what the man is doing there since he clearly doesn't belong to this shop. Watching his hands closely, she spots him pulling several coins out of his own pocket to make a purchase. Observing the pharmacist hand over a small paper packet, she questions if that is really medicine being sold. The realization hitting her like a physical blow, she stammers as she realizes he is actually selling it. Furious at the disgusting greed, she deduces they are reselling the medicine just because they couldn't hire Annalai. Refusing to turn a blind eye, she vows she cannot just ignore this blatant medicine resale happening right in front of her. Shocked by the cruel scheme, she realizes they are buying Annalie's free medicine from poor patients to flip for a profit. Theorizing their target demographic, she guesses they sell to upper-class snobs who want the cure without stepping into the slums. A deep, authoritative voice suddenly cuts through her thoughts, sharply addressing her as Lady Violetta. Frustrated by her powerless position, she wishes there were laws she could invoke, knowing her words alone hold no weight. Snapping to attention, she is shocked to hear someone flatly confirm that there are no laws against this in their kingdom. A sharp, calculating eye framed by glasses zeroes in on her, signaling a shift in the conversation's tone. Demanding a full report, the bespectacled man asks her to explain exactly what she witnessed in town. Explaining the fatal risks of reckless dosages, she reveals she saw someone selling another apothecary's medicine for profit. Startled by the intense scrutiny, she stares up with wide eyes as the gravity of her discovery fully sets in. Furious at the injustice, the determined woman passionately defends the apothecary who made the medicine. Although hesitant to interfere as the designated villainess, her unyielding resolve violently shatters the metaphorical glass holding her back. Analyzing the perilous situation, the dark-haired bespectacled man heavily considers warning Anneli. A somber shadow darkens Viola's face as the true gravity of the conflict sets in. Slicing through the tension, speed lines frame her narrowing eyes to signal a sudden spark of absolute conviction. Refusing to live a cowardly life where she lies about her sense of justice again, she ruthlessly crushes her inner doubts. Gripping her collar with white-knuckled intensity, she physically solidifies her burning resolve. Honoring a sacred promise made before her death, Viola loudly declares her immediate return to town. Intercepting the bespectacled man by the towering bookshelves, she urgently demands a carriage. Arriving at the rustic clinic under the sprawling sky, she fiercely vows to live true to her own will this time. Surprised gasps erupt from the clinic workers as they immediately recognize Lady Viola's sudden arrival. Bridging the gap after a long absence, Viola offers a warm but formal greeting to the stunned Anneli. Commanding the space with quiet patience, Viola requests a private conversation once the healer finishes her grueling work. Shocked by the overwhelming horde of patients at sunset, Viola quickly apologizes for interrupting the absolute chaos. An exhausted Anneli hilariously navigates an endless, dizzying barrage of complaints about sore throats and aching backs. Overjoyed patients enthusiastically shower Lady Viola with immense gratitude for her unexpected, life-saving assistance. Admitting she completely underestimated washing clothes by hand, Viola genuinely marvels at modern machines while Anneli questions her visit. Taking command of the exhausted room, Viola firmly orders Lars and Anneli to take a well-deserved break. Shattering the comfortable silence, Viola instantly shifts the atmosphere to reveal the real reason for her arrival. Presenting a rustic basket of baked goods, Viola formally thanks the shocked Anneli for treating her previously. Dropping an absolute bombshell over tea, Lars chillingly warns Anneli that her medicine is being illegally resold in town. Furious realization violently strikes as they definitively identify the treacherous culprit as Eric. Exposing the crime, Viola perfectly recounts witnessing the suspicious man selling the supplied medicine directly to a pharmacist. Slamming her fist in absolute rage, Viola damns the man for unforgivably betraying Lady Anneli's pure kindness. Matching her blazing fury, Lars shares the intense disgust over someone betraying his master through illicit reselling. Seething with silent, explosive anger, Lars crushes his trembling hand into a tight fist. Both Lars and Viola reel backward in sudden, staggering confusion at a shockingly naive response. Tilting her head with baffling innocence, Anneli completely derails the tension by asking what is actually wrong with reselling the medicine. Desperately pleading with Anneli to think carefully, Viola aggressively warns that improper dosages could be incredibly dangerous. Buckling under the harsh truth, Anneli nervously touches her face while weakly attempting to justify the dire situation. Pushing back with desperate altruism, Anneli argues that her free medicine is fine as long as it helps someone in desperate need. The devastating physical toll of her reckless actions fully materializes as her condition appears significantly weaker than before. Shattered by her sudden falter, Viola cries out Anneli's name in deep, agonizing concern. Wiping her deeply shadowed eyes, Anneli miserably attempts to brush off her obvious physical collapse as mere fatigue. Lars intensely gazes down at the overworked, crumbling healer with a heavy mixture of profound pity and desperate worry. Snapping forward with aggressive care, Viola loudly demands to know if Anneli is actually eating and sleeping properly. Clutching her chest defensively, the cornered Annalie desperately hesitates to provide a straight, honest answer. Refusing to back down, Viola interrogates her about the church's previous agreement to cover the clinic's supplies and living costs. Absolute shock rips through Viola upon discovering Annalie abandoned the church and now pays for the crushing expenses entirely by herself. Exploding with righteous rage, Lars screams that the corrupt church is too busy wagging their tails for nobles to ever help her. Unraveling the insane level of self-sacrifice, Viola realizes the heroine works for free while exhaustingly growing her own herbs. Mercilessly lecturing the stubborn healer, Viola bluntly declares that this suicidal brand of altruism will completely destroy her. Stunned to her core by Annalie's unexpectedly titanium-clad refusal, Viola falls into a breathless, defeated silence. Driven by pure, blazing medical conviction, Annalie violently refuses to abandon the dying patients standing right in front of her. Piercing the veil of the heroine's blinding selflessness, Viola watches Annalie trail off while mentioning her mysterious parents. Snapping her mouth shut, Annalie quickly and defensively dismisses the lingering thought. Leaning in with intense, unrelenting curiosity, Viola gently but firmly pushes Annalie to talk about her parents. Shimmering tears well up in Annalie's fiercely determined eyes as she finally prepares to unveil her hidden past. A resolute, breathtakingly soft smile graces her lips as she fully embraces the unyielding weight of her legacy. Shattering the ultimate mystery, Annalie proudly and defiantly declares that her parents were doctors. Gently pushing for the truth, Viola asks the devoted healer why she is so dedicated to helping others. A somber flashback reveals Annalie's parents never overcharged poor patients before tragically dying in an epidemic when she was 10. Entering the harsh environment of the orphanage, the young Annalie met many people struggling to survive. She anchored her soul to the guiding principle that living her life for others would make her own life richer. Desperately clinging to her inherited ideals, Annalie tearfully insists that her parents' selfless path was not a mistake. Tears stream down her face as she resolutely defends her family's honor and unwavering beliefs. A stunned silence falls over Viola as the profound weight of Annalie's tragic backstory strikes a deep chord. Viola gasps softly, a sudden wave of empathy washing over her as she connects with the heroine's pain. Viola's internal monologue reveals her own past life parents ran a fair trade company that quickly collapsed because ideals alone cannot solve poverty. She painfully remembers how her parents' genuinely good work went completely unappreciated while shady businesses thrived in the shadows. Clenching her fist in bitter frustration, Viola recalls feeling utterly powerless to change the unjust world around her. A haunting sense of inadequacy plagued her past self as she constantly wondered what they could have done to be accepted. A profound sense of loss washes over Viola as she questions what ultimately went wrong with their noble efforts. Staring at scattered business textbooks in her memory, Viola remembers desperately searching for any practical way she could help. She tragically admits that she got entirely buried in corporate work and lost sight of what truly mattered. A spark of realization ignites as Viola remembers she originally became a management consultant to help righteous people improve society. Looking at the selfless healer, Viola recognizes that Annalie is exactly the kind of person she always wanted to help. Viola affectionately compares Annalie's strong-willed, kind nature to the guiding light of her own late parents. Snapping Viola out of her deep thoughts, Annalie hesitantly asks if her tragic story somehow offended the noblewoman. A warm, understanding smile graces Viola's face as she silently processes the deep connection between their shared traumas. Viola vehemently denies being offended, her mind racing with a newfound determination to genuinely help the struggling healer. Thanking her for sharing, Viola firmly explains that self-sacrifice isn't true kindness if the beneficiaries start taking the aid for granted. Stunned by the blunt but profound truth, Annalie listens intently as Viola praises her wonderful parents and admirable beliefs. Viola gently points out that Annalie's sheltered upbringing means she has never known real poverty or sustainable aid. Lars stands silently in the background, carefully observing the intense and transformative conversation unfolding between the two women. A confident, radiant smile bursts onto Viola's face as she dramatically announces she has a brilliant structural idea. Stunned confusion fills the rustic clinic as Viola authoritatively commands Annalie to start making detailed medical records immediately. Annalie completely panics, crying out in sheer overwhelm that she could never manage such a massive administrative task. Viola relentlessly lists off the necessary tracking components, from patient symptoms and medicine dosages to managing the herb stock. Cutting through Annalie's frantic protests about her exhausted brain, Viola firmly promises to help her carry the heavy burden. Gripping Annalie's shoulders with fierce, unyielding determination, Viola explicitly vows to protect the heroine from now on. Driven by a newfound purpose, Viola silently refuses to watch the compassionate healer collapse right before her very eyes. Acknowledging the dangerous death flag looming over her, Viola desperately pleads to let her properly support the clinic. Viola realizes that Annalie's pure compassion isn't wrong, it simply needs a sturdy foundation to be fiercely protected. Leaning in close, Viola gently validates the immense, lonely, and grueling effort Annalie has put in until now. Heavy tears immediately well up in Annalie's eyes as the profound emotional validation finally shatters her resilient defenses. Pulling the crying healer into a warm, comforting embrace, Viola softly promises that she doesn't have to fight alone anymore. While Annalie whispers a tearful thank you, Viola silently urges her to follow her own will and never compromise again. Clutching Viola's dress with trembling hands, Annalie struggles to process the overwhelming wave of unprecedented support. Hot tears stream down her face as Annalie violently sobs that no one has ever shown her such incredible understanding before. Energized by her dual mission to save the girl and her own life, Viola cheerfully declares they start their real work tomorrow. A triumphant sense of destiny settles over the room as Viola realizes her true battle to change fate is finally beginning. The elegant woman sipping her tea decides it is time to properly organize their dire situation. Her unseen companion calmly voices agreement with her assessment of the circumstances. The young boy notes with dread that saying their problems out loud makes everything sound significantly worse. The blonde girl looks absolutely shocked as she learns they must immediately stop giving away medicine for free. A bright transition highlights the girl smiling warmly amidst blooming flowers. The woman explains that keeping proper patient records will quickly help them narrow down suspicious individuals and halt their prescriptions. The boy gently clarifies to the stunned girl that these harsh measures are all part of an essential anti-resale plan. The blonde girl stares blankly, still trying to grasp the concept of this sudden plan. The woman promises to prepare the record format herself and kindly asks Annalie to review it afterward. She states that charging enough to cover ingredient costs will shrink reseller profit margins and hopefully force them to give up. She firmly adds that their second step is completely stopping the free distribution of medicine. She suggests patients could tend the herb garden or wash clothes in exchange since they have too much work anyway. The woman takes a thoughtful sip of her tea while contemplating the next phase of her strategy. She then turns to her companions and asks what they think of the plan. Smiling warmly, she reminds the young girl not to look so worried because collapsing would prevent her from saving anyone. She confidently looks at her companions and asks how her proposed solution sounds. Realizing the wisdom in her words, they agree that they no longer have to carry the burden entirely by themselves. Shifting the topic, the woman stands up at the table to address the clinic's ongoing financial deficit. The young man enthusiastically agrees to move forward with the plan. He declares that he will personally take action on the matter very soon. A decorative sign depicting a medicine bottle hangs outside a building. 2 weeks later, the scene shifts to the bustling streets of a grand European-style town. The woman warmly greets a young visitor and asks what seems to be the problem. Now wearing a cloak, she politely asks a bespectacled shopkeeper for a moment of his time. She boldly announces that she is there to sell a stomach medicine produced by Lady Annalie's clinic. The shopkeeper immediately questions who told her about them, prompting her to claim Mr. Eric sent her. The shopkeeper narrows his eyes in sharp suspicion at the mere mention of selling. He mutters in recognition of the name as he intensely scrutinizes the disguised woman. Unfazed by his glare, she confidently presents the package of medicine to the cautious man. The shopkeeper demands she hand it over so he can check the contents for himself. He glares at the mysterious package with a deeply critical and intense gaze. Her heart pounds nervously as the man examines the genuine medicine. The shopkeeper carefully opens the folded paper to inspect the powdered contents. He leans in close to get a better look and carefully smell the aromatic herbs. He notes that even regular buyers cannot get her medicine easily lately and questions how she obtained it. He frowns deeply while analyzing the powder's texture and composition. He confirms the medicine is authentic because the distinct herbs she uses are immediately recognizable. She internally celebrates that their anti-resale plan drove away shady customers, giving her the perfect excuse to bring this here. She realizes with excitement that all their hard work over the past week has finally paid off. The shopkeeper anxiously asks if she will be able to continue supplying him with the valuable remedy. Smiling confidently, she reveals that she actually has a much better proposal for him. She internally notes that her research showed customers have been pestering him non-stop since the medicine became scarce. She offers to set up a regular trade, highlighting that Lady Annalie's medicine is highly effective and sells incredibly well. She boldly suggests they sign a contract regarding the actual formula itself. The shopkeeper freezes, his expression shifting from curiosity to pure shock at the outrageous offer. He points out the glaring contradiction, asking why a reseller would bring up sharing the actual formula. He stares in utter disbelief at the audacious and unexpected proposal. She casually presents a document and declares that the exact recipe is written right there. Fighting her nerves to maintain composure, she explains that Lady Annalie wishes to provide her original formula to many people at a fair price. Leaning in with a winning smile, she asks if it wouldn't be more profitable for him to brew it himself instead of buying resold medicine. Glaring with deep suspicion, the bespectacled shopkeeper scrutinizes the mysterious document presented before him. The elegant princess casually dangles a small pouch over the counter while awaiting his cautious response. The cautious merchant insists he must verify the formula's authenticity before signing anything to avoid a catastrophic fraud. He pauses in intense contemplation, reluctantly admitting he might actually consider the unusual and complex contract. She quickly deduces from his intense glare that the cunning man is attempting to memorize the entire formula on the spot. He rubs his chin thoughtfully, his sharp eyes locked onto the document as he burns the valuable information into his mind. Smiling knowingly, she gestures gracefully toward the paper to snap him out of his intense concentration. She confidently declares that the meticulously crafted recipe is perfectly complete exactly as it is written. She reveals that the secret ingredient is an exclusive, specially cultivated herb grown only by Lady Annalie herself. Furious, the shopkeeper erupts and points out that the recipe is entirely useless without knowing the true identity of the mysterious Herb X. He freezes in sudden realization, his eyes widening as the absolute brilliance of her trap finally dawns on him. A smirk touches his lips as he mutters his profound understanding of her brilliant and airtight defensive strategy. She lays out the ultimate catch, explaining that anyone wishing to brew the medicine must purchase the secret ingredient directly from them. She proudly explains that guarding the herb's identity and mandating direct purchases completely prevents any unauthorized mass production. With a triumphant grin, she notes that standard contracts are useless against sheer memorization, making her secret ingredient strategy utterly foolproof. Leaning in with an air of absolute control, she confidently asks if he is finally ready to sign the document. She internally rejoices over this dual-income victory, securing massive profits from both the initial contract and the exclusive herb sales. The shrewd merchant adjusts his glasses, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a highly profitable new business opportunity. To seal the deal flawlessly, she throws in an irresistible offer of a free first batch of the secret herb upon signing today. Throwing his hands up in joyous defeat, the ecstatic shopkeeper enthusiastically accepts her incredible absolute deal. Her facade briefly slips as she flinches at his sudden explosive laughter, desperately trying to maintain her professional composure. A firm, decisive handshake completely solidifies their newly forged and highly lucrative business partnership. Stunned by the compliment, she humbly accepts his praise while he marvels at having secured such an incredibly cunning new partner. Her eyes sparkle with fierce determination as she realizes the massive potential of her newly enacted business strategy. He proposes they kick off their alliance with a robust preliminary contract for 100 batches of the coveted remedy. As she walks away, she relishes the familiar thrill of a successful negotiation and hopes the final contract goes just as flawlessly. She clenches her delicate hand into a triumphant fist, feeling the exhilarating rush of her undeniable success. She vows to deliver the herbs the very next day, deeply relieved that the clinic's dire financial struggles will finally end. Watching her ruthless efficiency, the young boy Lars sweat drops and flatly asks if she is secretly a professional con artist. Genuinely offended by the outrageous accusation, the disguised princess glares sharply at Lars in utter disbelief. Stammering under her terrifying gaze, Lars hastily justifies his question by noting her well-known merchant family background. Standing beside her in awe, Lars asks where she managed to acquire such incredibly smooth and persuasive negotiation skills. She brushes off the praise, instead expressing profound gratitude to Lars for keeping a cool head when the shopkeeper initially snapped. Lars bashfully averts his eyes, modestly downplaying his composed demeanor as nothing particularly special. Lars thoughtfully points out that she could have easily achieved their goal by simply selling the pre-made medicine directly to the shop. She flashes a reassuring smile, explaining that this elaborate arrangement perfectly aligns with Lady Annalie's ultimate desires. Lars quickly realizes that forcing Annalie to mass-produce the medicine herself would only lead to her utter physical exhaustion. The princess passionately explains that delegating the brewing process is the only way to fulfill Annalie's dream without breaking her health. By sharing the base formula, she ensures that countless others can mass-produce the exact same life-saving remedy. Clutching her bag tightly, she skips forward in pure, unadulterated bliss as the weight of their financial burdens lifts entirely. Watching her radiant joy, Lars smiles warmly and admits he is deeply impressed by her incredible foresight and kindness. After Lars playfully notes she would make a terrifying enemy, she excitedly rallies him to conquer the next batch of reseller shops. The scene shifts to a bright new morning as the exhausted duo greets Annalie back at the peaceful clinic. Standing outside the rustic building, Annalie nervously admits that she has recently run into a rather perplexing dilemma. The blonde girl turns around with a brilliant, welcoming smile, cheerfully wishing her beloved sister a very good morning. The exhausted princess weakly returns the greeting, completely drained of all her energy from the previous day's relentless negotiations. Annalie beams with immense pride, showering her utterly drained sister with praise for miraculously securing 5 preliminary contracts in a single day. Blushing furiously at the affectionate title, the flustered princess stammers wildly while Lars teasingly asks if she hates being called a sister. Gathering her lingering energy, the princess gently calls out to Annalie to address the dilemma she mentioned earlier. Annalie freezes completely solid, her large eyes wide and entirely blank as a new, overwhelming shock washes over her. Grappling with a profound fear of crossing an irreversible threshold, Annalie questions her sudden decision to allow the beautifully revitalized heroine to call her sister. Overwhelmed by sheer endearment, she intensely agonizes over the heroine's painfully cute demeanor. Channeling the perspective of a male capture target, Annalie admits the heroine's joyful willingness to go anywhere with her sister would guarantee absolute infatuation. Radiating pure affection, the heroine eagerly proposes they embark on their journey together. Beckoning with undeniable charm, the heroine urges her sister forward with a lingering thought. Heavy wooden wheels grind against the earth, signaling the imminent departure of the merchant cart. Demonstrating reliable efficiency, Lars confirms securing the medicinal herbs onto the transport, earning Annalie's swift gratitude. Lunging forward with a sudden burst of urgency, the young knight desperately calls out for the princess to halt her steps. Igniting a fierce wave of productivity, Annalie rallies her devoted companion to conquer their goal of finalizing 5 crucial pharmacy contracts today. Observing his flawlessly executed romantic maneuver, Annalie marvels at the textbook charm that effortlessly captivates the surrounding ladies. Radiating protective chivalry, Lars smoothly intervenes to shield Annalie from a hazardous step. Acknowledging his dashing knightly visage, Annalie silently understands why the clinic's patients harbor secret, fervent infatuations for Lars. Slicing through their peaceful momentum, the arrogant Eric obstructs their path with a demanding inquiry about their destination. Confronting the sleazy reseller with unyielding resolve, Annalie definitively severs their business ties by refusing to supply him with any more medicine. Radiating pure contempt, the thwarted swindler fiercely clicks his tongue in volatile frustration. Recoiling internally, Annalie suppresses a visceral groan of disgust directed at the sleazy flirt's unwelcome presence. Ambushed by an absurd financial extortion, Annalie fiercely questions the sudden demand for rent, as if it were an arbitrary property tax. Imposing a tyrannical financial burden, Eric commands the immediate surrender of 100,000 RAL as a mandatory operational fee. Discarding any pretense of commercial trade, the thug aggressively clarifies his sole mission is extorting their hard-earned rent money. Revealing his predatory logic, Eric dictates that her previously free residency was strictly subsidized by his resale profits, mandating immediate payment moving forward. Weaponizing a feared local authority, the extortionist arrogantly proclaims the entire district operates under Mr. Damien's absolute, inescapable command. Intervening with steadfast loyalty, Lars shields Lady Annalie and commands her to completely ignore the thug's extortionist nonsense. Sinking to repulsive depths, Eric vilely suggests the princess commodify her own beautiful body to settle the insurmountable tax. Erupting with unprecedented fury, Lars violently commands the filthy swine to shut his mouth, declaring the space sacred against such scum. Staggered by the explosive retaliation, the cowardly thug visibly recoils in sheer, breathless shock. Regaining his cruel composure, Eric aggressively seizes the knight's shoulder while spitting a derogatory insult about his intrinsic filth. Plunging the atmosphere into a chilling tension, Eric maliciously dangles the revelation of a devastating hidden secret. Weaponizing a toxic whisper, the sleazy antagonist gleefully confirms the darkest rumors surrounding the young knight. Frozen in anxious anticipation, Anneli braces herself against the psychological blow about to strike her closest protector. Paralyzed by the sudden unearthing of his deepest trauma, Lars's eyes widen in a silent, agonizing horror. Ruthlessly dismantling the knight's dignity, Eric exposes Lars as the abandoned, illegitimate offspring of a wandering dancer and a transient baron. Striking the ultimate psychological nerve, the thug cruelly mocks Lars's pure facade by declaring him a fundamentally unwanted child. Radiating a murderous, uncontained aura, the pushed knight intensely dares his tormentor to repeat the vile slander. Navigating a maze of profound cultural ignorance, Anneli mentally stumbles over the seemingly innocuous term of a wandering dancer. Unleashing a terrifyingly feral wrath, Lars promises brutal, permanent silence to the man who dared desecrate his lineage. Piercing the volatile chaos with a desperate plea, the terrified princess screams for her beloved knight to immediately cease his violent charge. Halting his destructive momentum instantly, the rigidly tense knight stands frozen beneath the unbearable weight of his exposed shame. Snapping back from the precipice of absolute violence, Lars flinches nervously at the gentle, grounding sound of Anneli's voice. Reeling from the unprecedented emotional explosion, Anneli silently acknowledges she has never witnessed Lars succumb to such terrifying rage. Powering through the lingering tension, the resilient group successfully secures the remaining city pharmacy contracts without further incident. Shrouded in the tranquil shade of rustling foliage, Anneli stands lost in a labyrinth of heavy, unresolved thoughts. Framed by a melancholic windowpane, Lars stares into the desolate distance, haunted by the brutal excavation of his past. Signaling a profound internal shift, a heavy, unspoken contradiction hangs heavily in the transitional void. Confronting her own sheltered existence, the privileged princess bitterly laments the massive blind spots born from her luxurious upbringing. Crushed by a wave of crushing inadequacy, she plainly admits to possessing zero genuine understanding of the world's harsher realities. Frantically scouring through academic tomes, Anneli questions the societal stigma attached to a dancer's lineage while noting the original game's glaring narrative omission. Encountering a baffling scholarly void, she realizes the Royal Encyclopedia of Arts deliberately excludes the fundamental discipline of dancing. Terrified of inflicting accidental emotional damage, she observes Lars's lingering depression and vows to uncover the hidden societal truth of wandering dancers. Slicing through her deep concentration, a sudden, ghostly hand dramatically invades her peripheral vision. Materializing without a single sound, Professor Sven startles the princess by intensely questioning her unexpected, specific interest in the performing arts. Startled from her late-night studies, Princess Anneli jumps as Professor Sven silently materializes behind her. Deep in thought, Anneli heavily ponders the mysterious, undocumented existence of wandering dancers. Seizing the rare opportunity, she directly asks the knowledgeable professor to reveal the hidden truth about these elusive performers. Sven bluntly dismisses her inquiry, explaining that lower-class performances are strictly excluded from the realm of recognized arts. Refusing to back down, Anneli presses further and demands to know the ultimate fate of a child born from a noble and a dancer. She grimly realizes this brutal class divide perfectly explains why such illegitimate children are actively erased from all official records. Adjusting his glasses, the professor prepares to shed light on the kingdom's darkest, unspoken societal norms. He chillingly details how these unwanted offspring are immediately banished to orphanages or churches, completely ignored by their noble fathers. Anneli mentally connects these tragic revelations to Lars, marveling at the sheer willpower it took for him to rise as a knight despite his church upbringing. A crushing wave of sorrow hits her as she comprehends the sheer cruelty of treating a child as if they simply do not exist. Her heart physically aches at the agonizing thought of Lars growing up as someone completely unwanted by the entire world. Sven watches her profound empathetic reaction in silence, his sharp eyes calculating her every emotion. Unable to mask her disgust, she openly condemns the societal practice as an unimaginably cruel injustice. Challenging her passive pity, the professor boldly suggests she harness her influence to permanently change the broken system. He explicitly urges her to ascend as queen and reshape the kingdom with her own hands. Stunned by the treasonous proposition, Annalai visibly recoils at the terrifying idea of taking the throne. She immediately backpedals, frantically shaking her head while denying any ability to overhaul the entire country. Panicking internally, she violently rejects the dangerous implication of forcefully seizing the crown. Terrified that he suspects her of plotting a coup just like her game counterpart, she fiercely denies having any such villainous ambitions. Sweating under his intense gaze, Annalai desperately swears she has zero intention of ruling, though she silently admits his suspicion is entirely logical. Hovering on the precipice of a major confession, she internally debates whether it is too early to reveal her ultimate endgame. She wrestles with the risky idea of announcing her planned abdication, fearing it might provoke unwanted investigations into her sudden change of heart. Sven simply smiles with an enigmatic, unreadable expression, patiently waiting for her next move. A tense, heavy silence stretches between them as Annalai searches for the courage to speak her truth. Locking eyes with the professor, she delivers a definitive, unwavering declaration that she absolutely does not desire the throne. Sven's expression sharpens intensely as he absorbs the monumental weight of her unprecedented statement. An eerie, breathless quiet settles over the dark library as her life-altering words hang suspended in the air. To her absolute bewilderment, the professor casually brushes off her shocking confession. With a dismissive smirk, he blatantly declares he will simply pretend he never heard her renounce the crown. Turning away, Sven vaguely advises the stunned princess to spend more time carefully considering her future. Leaving her sputtering in utter confusion, he casually reminds her that the royal examination still has 10 long months remaining. Baffled by his manipulative retreat, Annalai questions why her personal abdication even matters to a mere academic. Clutching her face in sheer frustration, she agonizes over how to help Lars when he clearly refuses to discuss his trauma. Unbeknownst to the princess, Professor Sven walks away into the shadows with a deeply satisfied, calculating grin. Slumping over her desk in absolute exhaustion, Annalai groans as her head throbs from the intense mental strain. Meanwhile, Lars stands frozen in silence, his rigid posture radiating a heavy, unshakable gloom. Observing him from afar, Annalai notes with deep concern that her beloved knight still looks incredibly unwell. Attempting to deflect an inquiry about her own visible exhaustion, she frantically claims she is merely sleep-deprived from overthinking. She desperately debates whether she should risk fracturing their bond by confronting the painful root of his depression. Annalai watches anxiously as Lars spends the entire morning wrapped in an intimidating aura that terrifies even his clinic patients. Connecting the narrative dots, she realizes his current melancholic behavior mirrors a specific, critical event from the original game. Her eyes widen in sudden, sharp realization as she spots an unexpected piece of jewelry clutched in his hand. Recalling the game's deep lore, she remembers that Lars eventually gifted the heroine his precious mother's keepsake ring. Annalai stares in absolute, unblinking shock as the massive romantic implications violently crash into her. Panicking wildly, she jumps to the absurd conclusion that Lars is already preparing to propose to her new sister. Crushed by her own romantic incompetence, she hilariously laments being a completely unreliable girl's night out princess in this life. Doubting her own frantic theory, she rationalizes that Lars and the heroine aren't even close enough for such a monumental step yet. Slicing through her chaotic internal monologue, Lars's voice suddenly calls out to her, demanding her immediate attention. Pivoting smoothly into a cheerful facade, Annalai greets the knight and brightly suggests they take a well-deserved break. Steeling her nerves, she formulates a tactical plan to start with casual conversation before stealthily slipping in the real, heavy questions. Inside, a hospitable host offers tea and sweets, though Lars intends to stop by only after finishing his tasks. Annalai catches Lars off guard by asking if the ring he was admiring is a gift for someone special. Stunned by the personal inquiry, Lars can only respond with a confused gasp. Panicking over her directness, Annalai frantically explains she just saw the ring catch the light and didn't mean to pry. Annalai scolds herself internally for being way too forward while offering a strained, nervous smile. Lars clears the air by revealing the ring is actually a keepsake from his mother. Surprised by her interest, Lars teases Anneli about being a young woman who cares about romance after all. Anneli realizes with a start that this is the same significant item she remembers from the game world. Lars begins the somber tale of how his mother originally received the ring from his father. He warns her that the history of the piece is far less glamorous than one might imagine. Looking away, Lars reveals that his mother was actually a wandering dancer. Shortly after his birth, she abandoned both him and the ring at a baron's estate. Lars laments that he and the ring were both discarded without a second thought, meaning nothing to her. He explains his estrangement from his father and his subsequent upbringing in a church after his mother's death. Lars identifies with the ring, viewing himself as unwanted, unclaimed, and unneeded by anyone. Deeply moved, Anneli repeats his words back to herself in disbelief. Lars tries to dismiss the heavy atmosphere, insisting that is all there is to his story. Anneli reflects on the ring's true value, knowing Lars has kept it close despite everything. She recalls that in the game, Lars intended to give the ring to Anneli as a symbol of his determination. Anneli wonders why Lars sounds so heartbreakingly lonely when she knows the depth of his character. Lars apologizes for the strange topic, but Anneli urgently calls out his name to stop him. The heavy moment is shattered when Lise runs toward them in a state of absolute terror. Trembling, Lise reports that a man appeared and began wrecking the herb garden. Lise presents a threatening note demanding rent, identifying the culprit as the man who harassed Lady Anneli before. The sheer audacity of the attack leaves Anneli and Lars in a state of shocked silence. Lars grits his teeth in rage, cursing the cowardly Eric for orchestrating such a low blow. Anneli groans in frustration as the weight of the situation sinks in. Furious, Anneli vows to settle the score directly with the boss behind the scheme, Damien. Lars jokingly warns Anneli that her villain face is terrifying poor Lise. A cat lurks nearby amidst the stench of rotting fish, signaling their arrival at the docks. Anneli observes the damage and declares they cannot let this escalation continue. Lars teases Anneli about her waste-not Japanese mindset when she suggests reusing the discarded fish. As they venture deeper into the eerie silence, Anneli wonders if a massive thug like Damien is waiting. The oppressive atmosphere of the hideout begins to rattle Anneli's nerves. Lars leads the way through the dilapidated industrial area, his hand resting near his sword. Anneli admits she only asked Lars to come along because she was genuinely frightened. She defends her right to be scared, questioning what Lars thinks of her. Lars is visibly surprised that someone with her knowledge would ever feel fear. Softening his gaze, Lars notes that Anneli seems to place an incredible amount of trust in him. He confesses he never expected such trust from someone who knows the truth of his past. Anneli insists her trust is natural because he is a knight, but Lars remains skeptical. Lars stands with his back to her, the weight of his lineage clearly heavy on his shoulders. He reminds her that despite his title, the blood of a wandering dancer still flows through him. Lars recalls Eric's insults, describing himself as the product of a woman who feigned love and abandoned her child. He challenges Anneli, asking if she ever suspected he might eventually deceive or betray her. Lars wears a self-deprecating smirk, calling himself a filthy and shameful man who cannot be trusted. Anneli is momentarily stunned by the intensity of his self-loathing. Refusing to let him spiral, Anneli reaches out and firmly grabs Lars by the face. She realizes that Lars has been cruelly hurting himself with his own internal dialogue. Anneli commands him to stop letting those toxic words get inside his head, insisting he is not defined by his parents. Lars listens intensely as he is reminded of his unwavering dedication to Anneli despite his serious nature. With a fierce gaze, his companion declares that his past does not define him and she fully entrusts her back to his blade. Cupping his face, she looks into his wide eyes and asks if her total trust in him is enough. The woman passionately argues that abandoning a child is unforgivable and encourages Lars to be angry at his parents. Stunned by the suggestion, Lars admits he has never considered the concept of being angry at them before. Panicking after her outburst, she realizes she got too worked up over the sensitive topic of class status. A close-up reveals her eye shimmering with a mix of relief and lingering concern. She brushes off her intensity, deciding that lifting Lars's spirits is all that truly matters. Composing herself, she adopts a casual attitude to move past the heavy emotional moment. A small, soft smile plays on her lips as she looks toward her companion with genuine affection. Lars remains silent, his sharp profile casting a shadow as he processes the weight of her words. Breaking the tension, she rallies the group to keep moving forward before the sun sets. Lars suddenly signals for silence, sensing an unknown presence lurking nearby. A mysterious man applauds the knight's sharp reflexes from the shadows. The newcomer steps forward with a smirk, offering a polite greeting to the startled pair. The man's face is revealed, sporting a confident grin and a rugged, unshaven look. Sweat beads on the woman's face as she eyes the stranger with immediate suspicion. The stranger addresses her as "little lady," questioning what business she has in such a place. The scene shifts to the exterior of the town buildings as noise begins to rise from the docks. The name Renard is invoked as the situation at the docks grows increasingly complicated. A resident notes the unusual commotion and wonders why the docks have become so noisy. Renard smiles brightly, confirming with a cheerful tone that he knows the person in question quite well.